are you doing this morning, sir?
I'm doing great. Hope you are, Casey.
Yeah, I was, and I've given this a lot of coverage, and I was eagerly looking forward to the fake timeline expiring yesterday and learning the plans that the University of North Carolina Chapel Hill had for the Silent Sam statue. And I guess I just assumed that their plan would be to follow the law and put it back there. But instead, truly amazed, something I never thought of, a $5.3 million Center for History and Education, essentially a building to lock it inside of, with an $800,000 annual maintenance or upkeep cost. Is that what you saw coming, and how do you feel about that?
I don't think you can ever predict what's coming out of our universities, Casey.
What in the world, man? What did you want to see? I get that there's on this radio I can be a little aggressive on things, and that's fine. I've been really bothered by the whole idea that we have lawmakers and then we have people that are in law enforcement. And I feel that on both fronts, we've seen some things that I consider to be lacking here, especially in some of the law enforcement leadership positions over in Orange County. That being said, lawmakers sat down. They figured out a process that we've talked about in length, and one that essentially had its own weird timeline crafted by the Board of Governors, and eventually now is producing this gigantic expenditure. All the while, we constantly hear how they need more money. Is anybody going to say anything, or is there some sort of weird separation where UNC is its own autonomous thing?
Well, listen, first I'm having phone difficulties, so you're probably going to hear me cutting out. I'm hearing you cutting out, but I think this is just one of those things nobody wants to touch it. I mean, nobody wants to put their finger on it. And, it's one of those issues that goes far beyond statues in our country. It really goes to the heart of the education system, how apropos that it's actually on a university campus that we're dealing with this issue, because the real issue is about teaching history. I think that's what's the ironic thing about this building about history. First of all, my question would be, what history are you going to teach? Who's going to actually write the textbook related to the history that's going to be shown in this museum? Because the reality is, the reason we're here today is because we haven't been teaching history. We haven't been teaching, especially the millennial generation, how to think for themselves in order to be able to debate and dialogue and argue and all those things in an effective manner to understand what they really believe. So it's a groupthink situation that has led to really just the vast majority, well, I would say probably half of millennials believing that socialism and communism is an okay thing. And so that's why you see the tactics you see, and that's why you see the language you see. So, there are underlying problems to all these things that get us here. So us stating facts and saying, hey, abide by the law, doesn't mean anything to people that are leftists and anarchists and so forth. So that's why we are where we are.
But do you think it would mean more if there were consequences that actually followed within the bounds of what those consequences should be? Because too often it's either dismissed in the form of the Moral Monday or a slap on the wrist.
Well, that's what we've seen. We've already seen it. I mean, we've seen it in Durham and the tearing down of statues. We've seen it with Silent Sam, and there is no consequence. So as long as there are no consequences for breaking the law, then the anarchy and the chaos is going to continue. And so obviously the university is fine with that. They're not looking to, inflict the full measure of punishment on the people that have broken the law. That's very apparent. They haven't done that. And, they talk out of both sides of their mouth saying we have to keep the statue on campus to uphold the law. I mean, the law said the statue had to go back up. I know they're in a dilemma. Obviously, they're in a dilemma because nobody wants to talk about this issue. Everybody thinks that they can just make it go away. But we can't make our history go away, Casey, and that's part of the challenge here. You probably remember, the Walter Williams articles about that, and talking about George Orwell and why we are where we are. And these are like Soviet tactics that they're using. So you have a bunch of millennials that believe that communism and socialism is a good thing. They don't know that it actually killed millions and millions of people around the world. So what we have is we have the repeating of history because people don't know history. So now we want to tear down history so people don't know history, so history can be repeated. It's a dangerous place to be, and if you give an inch, they'll take a mile, and they'll move from Confederate monuments to whatever the next agenda happens to be.
The Columbus statue and Columbus Circle in New York, and the list goes on and on.
Asian broadcaster Robert Lee for ESPN not being able to announce a game.
Yeah,
I mean, how insane is that, right?
Well, and here's what I'll say too, because I think that I don't think it's fair to say that half of millennials don't get it, because we just had it. There actually was a study that was just out. We talked about it last week, and basically what they did is they surveyed democratically registered millennials. So you got half, basically half, probably a little more considering the age bracket, and it was about 46% of them would describe themselves as either socialist or democratic socialist. And so you got half of half, basically, that you're getting into. Now, it doesn't take many out of that group to decide, and I don't think that they don't know that communism killed a bunch of people. I think that when you look at the rhetoric right now, we have so dehumanized our political opponents that we're okay with them disappearing, if you catch my drift. And when we can't even have a conversation that starts with, can we agree it's not okay to vandalize stuff? I don't know how you bridge that gap. But I will say this, and I know you know this, leadership is sometimes hard. It's not all ribbon cuttings and parade waves. And I am, and I know others are, really, really disappointed with the leadership that we've seen out of UNC and the leadership that we've seen among legislators who should be screaming from the mountain about, hey, we have laws. If you don't like the laws, come run against me. And that's the process.
Yeah, and again, I just think people are scared to take up the topic. I think this is a place where I think people kind of would have to admit that because they're scared and they want to run from this topic, that you'd say, hey, the left has won on this. If you can call people a racist, look at all the qualifiers, right? So what do they talk about when they talk about this article? The other side talks about white supremacy.
Right.
So that really is their talking point. If you don't agree with us, you're a white supremacist. If you don't agree with us, you're a racist. If you don't agree with us, you're a bigot. If you don't agree with us, you're a phobe of some kind. And that is their mantra. So there is no conversation. There is no discussion going on. If you don't agree, the media, everybody else calls you one of those things. So people run and hide because they say, no, I'm not those things. So I'm going to step back. And that's, again, the left is winning on this because the media is allowing them to win.
The TV stations, of course, were very happy to go out with multiple camera angles and interview the hell out of people last night, including we had one arrest for assaulting law enforcement, so that's nice. They did the thing where they talked to some of the protesters. They then talked to students who were like, what's the big deal? And then they did one where it was supposed to be the moderated position, and she says something really troubling. And I want you to hear this little snippet. This is from WRAL.
I think that's actually a very good idea. We don't have to accept what's occurred in history, but we can just...
Okay, did you hear what she just said? We don't have to accept what's occurred in history. Yes, you do, right?
Yeah.
You have to accept that it occurred. And until we get the time machine, there's history that's already the first part of this interview. That's history. It just is what it is. Yeah. How do you get to that mind? How do you break through on that mindset where history's ugly? It ain't pretty, and if you don't understand it, it's the whole doomed to repeat it thing.
That's right, and that's one of the almost ironic purposes, I believe, of monuments and things. Any monument that you can find around the world probably has some group somewhere that suffered at the hands of whoever that was erected to, and so we learn from those things. So I would consider things like a Holocaust museum a monument of sorts. They're certainly very different in D.C. and Jerusalem, but they're monuments so that we don't repeat these things. But they're very dirty, ugly history. Slavery was a very dirty, ugly history. The Civil Rights Movement had some just dirty, ugly things going on behind the scenes as we were working our way through that. But we've come a long way in America, further in our country than any other country in the world, I believe, in this regard. And there are things we should celebrate, and then there's things we should look back and go, people overcame that ugly history because we didn't try to brush it under the rug, because we didn't try to act like it didn't exist, because man, as soon as you do that, you really do get what's happened in communist Russia. There are people that do not know the history of communism, do not know the history of their country, and so they can create an entire mythology around why their country exists, and we certainly don't want that here.
Well, I appreciate you checking in a day earlier with us. So my question is, and maybe you don't know the answer to this, is UNC they can just go ahead and build this thing? I mean, they're going to have to go through the commission to move it, right?
Yeah, I think the commission will have to decide, final say, Maybe the Board of Governors. I think they'll have to present this to the Board of Governors as well. Again, my guess would be that they will, raise student fees at some level to pay for this thing. It's not just the $5.3 million building, but as I think you mentioned at the beginning, the $800,000 a year to maintain this $5 million building is a bit ludicrous. So I think they probably have some pencil sharpening to do before they get there.
All right. Well, we'll see where it goes. We'll talk soon, maybe after the holidays. You're going to be doing some traveling, so
yeah, we'll catch up with you after the holidays, probably, Casey.
Okay. All right. Appreciate it, Dan, and Merry Christmas to you in advance. Okay.
All right. Take care now.
Yep.
Bye-bye.
Have a good one.